Let's talk about the Beatles. So everyone says that Paul McCartney is controlling, that Paul McCartney's domineering. And at times this can be true. He's a perfectionist. He takes charge. He gets his hands on everyone else's songs, and he wants everyone else to stick around for all his songs. But they need him. They sometimes he might, cross a line occasionally, right? Like, they're like, oh, I didn't want you to do that to my song. But a lot of times these guys are like a little bit helpless without Paul. Okay, like for instance, John was pretty terrible at explaining what he wanted musically. Like, he had ideas, he had these dreams in his head of how he wanted things to be. He didn't know how to explain it, and oftentimes Paul was John's interpreter. Like, okay, well, I guess John kind of wants maybe this, I guess. And sometimes John might complain, like, later. Like, he never does it in the moment, which is, like, annoying. He's always like, Paul McCartney subconsciously made my songs bad and his good. But it's like, Paul knew exactly what he wanted. He knew exactly what he wanted all the time. He went to George Martin, he's like, this. Half the time he could do it. And John didn't. He's over here, like, telling people I want my song to sound like an orange. Nobody knows what the heck that means, okay? If your song sounds a little bit weird, that's probably why. And you see, like, we're watching, like, the making of Sgt. Pepper, and you just see John, the poor guy, he's, like, looking around, he's all helpless, like, help me. I don't know, how do I make the strawberries field sound the way I want it to? Like everyone surrounding him during his crisis, trying to figure out what he wants because he can't say it. They're all suggesting different ideas. What if we do this? What if we do that? George is bringing in his Indian music. Paul's like, what did you want to add? What instrument was that? Like, what if you do this? And John loved the idea. And obviously, John made the song. It's a great song. He wrote it. Credit goes to him. Obviously, a lot of it was his ideas as well. And I guess he had this great idea he had two different recordings. One was more like acoustic and one was more something else. And he wanted both versions, and they told him, like, well, that's impossible. But they did it because John wanted him to. And things like that. The weird sounds was Paul. I guess he complained about it later. I don't know. It's because Paul made my song weird. But the way it sounds is like John was really just trying to voice what he wanted on the song, and he didn't know how to do it. So if things got a little askew along the way, I wouldn't blame anybody there. Everybody complains, Paul, why are you making me do these many takes? Which could be tiring because I think they're just trying to have fun, and Paul's like, it needs to be perfect all the time and making him do crazy amount of takes. But everyone complains about Maxwell Silverhammer or whatever, which is not that great of a song. In my opinion, that's probably the worst of it. And let's be real, it's a little bit of a weird song. When I first heard that, I was like, what the heck is this? A guy going around killing everybody with his silver hammer. I mean, it's fun. I have fun with it. But I could imagine, John hated the song. So the fact that he had to do a bunch of takes on it, even though he hated it, is probably why it was so frustrating. Took them 21 takes to do Maxwell Silverhammer, and it took them 26 takes to do Strawberry Fields. It took them 3 days to do Maxwell Silverhammer. It took them 5 weeks to do Strawberry Fields. You didn't hear Paul complaining, let me tell you. But yeah, I guess you could argue Strawberry Fields is a better song. If anybody ever needed Paul on a song, like, I never heard him complain, like, oh, they overworked me. But maybe you could say it's because they didn't overwork him, so that's the difference. Paul's the perfectionist, and everyone else is easy breezy. But I'm just saying, I feel like, Paul's just ready to go. He's ready to make music. I feel like he's probably always excited to help people out on their songs. I guess you could argue maybe he didn't always help George out. Everyone thinks he's the abandoned little kitten that never got any love. He did help him with, like, Here Comes the Sun and stuff. They were in the studio. John wasn't even there because he got in a car accident. So just them working on it. They needed him, I think, more than they realized in a few different occasions. Well, even Paul talks about it, so I don't know if he's just making himself look better. But there was, like, one time where he was, like, telling Ringo how to play his drums or something. And then Ringo got all upset. He's like, don't tell me how to play my drums. And then I guess Paul was like, okay, oops. And then, like, seconds later, Ringo's like, okay, Paul, do your thing. You feel me? Mm-hmm. And then George is always making a big point about Paul's always working on my stuff. Everyone's always saying he's controlling, telling George what to do, and all this other stuff. And then when you watch the Get Back, you see George is struggling with writing the song Something. He's like, I've been working on this song for 9 months and everything. It's taking him forever to write the song, and he can't get this lyric for the life of him. But what's interesting to me is while he's struggling, you got everybody in the room, and he's just like, Paul, I can't, what line should I do? I can't figure it out. Like if he's that irritated with Paul, like, helping him on his songs, you think, why is he asking him? You know, this is his chance to write his own lyrics without Paul getting in the way. And he didn't even ask anybody else. He didn't even ask him. John comes in and says, you know, pomegranate or whatever. No, that's him. Obviously, that was his suggestion. What was cauliflower? John's like, I have a filler in word. With the same amount of syllables. And he's, you know, like cauliflower. But anyway. Yeah, I'm just gonna just throw this out there. Like, you watch The Get Back, and you have George Harrison basically saying, I think he, like, wants to play, like, Eric Clapton or something. And, because he's like, that's his new obsession. And Paul's like, don't play like Eric Clapton. Play like George Harrison. And in my opinion, I'm like, that's kind of a compliment, you know? I think George wanted to be a little bit more flashy with his guitar, and, like, the Beatles' #1 thing was, like, play exactly what the song needs. And I guess that was, but whatever. This is, George, I guess, should be able to play his guitar however he wants, I guess is the argument. If he wants to do something, Paul shouldn't shut him up on it or something. I don't know what the problem is, but just throwing it out there.
One of the major scenes that keeps popping up on my TikTok and YouTube is in The Get Back, when they were trying to figure out a guitar part on one of the songs, and Paul and George were both trying to work at the same time, and George was suggesting something, and Paul was basically saying, quiet, let me figure out what I'm doing first, and then we'll look at what you're doing. And George was worried that by the time Paul was done, that he wouldn't have a say or be able to put his in. But I can also relate to that, because if Paul had an idea, how you can't hear your own idea, you have to work it out and hear your idea. I don't know. George could have done the same thing and told Paul to be quiet.
So we can always say, like, you know, this is just our opinions. You know, you can write in the comments below what you think. We're always ready to hear the other side of it. You know, we're open-minded. Okay, show us your side of the story. So during the Sgt. Pepper, because, like, we were looking in the Sgt. Pepper, this was mainly Paul McCartney's baby album. Okay, this was his baby. I think he worked on it, whatever. George wasn't that into it for a few reasons. For one, there's, like, a lot of machinery stuff, so it's pretty boring. And, you know, it's probably mostly Paul's ideas and stuff anyway, so it's like, whatever, I guess I'll just sit over here in the corner. So he was kind of bored. He did contribute a lot of stuff, though, when you, like, look it up, like Strawberry Fields and stuff, and other songs, ideas and things. And George was really into India. I think he was in India a lot during this, I guess. I don't know. It's weird because they keep saying he wasn't there, he was in India. But then you look it up, he was there. You can see him there and his contribution, so. I don't know why, like, some people act like he had nothing to do with Sgt. Pepper, and then other times he did. But he basically just is, Sgt. Pepper's not his favorite album. He was bored with it. I think he just wanted to sit around with his friends and have a jam session, basically. Like, let's all just play our instruments together, you know? Let's hold hands and play instruments together. He didn't want the grueling perfectionism and, you know, the producer part of it and machinery part of it and all the weird stuff. But the thing is that everyone says about the Beatles and, you know, why they last the test of time even today, and what made them so legendary is their experimentation and all the things that they did. You know, no one's really done that. They use the studio as their instrument. They're like, let's do this, let's do that, let's weird stuff that no one's ever heard of. They're listening to them. What's going on? Everyone's minds are blown. You know, they changed music. And George sounds like he just didn't really want to do that because it's boring. And honestly, that would be me. That would be me. I'm not blaming him. This is boring. I want to have fun. But if we're talking about, like, the history and the, you know, Beatles, it kind of sounds like George wouldn't have been a part of that because he would have wanted to keep things fairly the same. Exactly. He did bring in some Indian instruments, which was cool. So, you needed it. You needed Sgt. Pepper. And George might have not liked it, but you needed it. And it was Paul's idea, and Paul wanted to do it. And it was, you look it up, it was their best-selling album. So, if you're going for star power, you're going for that, I mean, Paul did it. So, I'm sorry, George, but I'm sorry. John Lennon's something else sometimes. So he's complaining. He's like, I'm sitting around with my wife and Paul's living the bachelor life. He keeps saying he's living the bachelor life. I don't know what that has to do with anything. But this is during probably the Beatles, you know, they're having a break or whatever from all the chaos and they're all running around, going home for a second, taking a break. He called John up and said, hey, you ready to go back in the studio? And Paul already had a lot of songs ready to go. And John's like, and so John didn't really have songs yet because Paul just said, let's start working, and Paul already has everything in his back pocket. So John was upset about this, I guess, more later than he was in the moment. He's like, subconsciously I knew what was going on. So he thinks Paul's trying to have the upper hand. He gets control, or of the album because he, put it in its direction, right? Because he made most of the songs already. And I can see John's point. Instead of calling him and saying, hey, let's make an album and let's start from scratch, Paul brings a bunch of songs. But I just feel like there's nothing really stopping John from also making music, like a little bit. You can grab your guitar and fiddle around and write down lyrics if you want to from home. I don't think this was Paul's secret, I'm in charge now. I feel like he just had some songs. He was excited to work on a new album with John.
I have something to add.
Yeah.
Should I add it myself?
Yeah, flip it.
I feel like Paul can't win because if Paul lays down some groundwork to make the recording sessions less hard, because a lot of the work was done to make it more relaxed, everybody's mad.
That's true.
If he overworks them because he's starting from scratch and he has to do a lot of work, they're mad. Everything he does, everybody's mad at Paul.
Well, I guess the only thing people liked was the White Album because everyone was chillaxed, but also... And the White Album was cool. You can't keep making the White Album. It was cool the one time because it was like, oh, look, her junk music. But you can't keep making junk music. And that's why everyone likes it. She's raised her eyebrows at me. She thinks...
I'm worried what Bono is going to think.
I don't know. Even remember what Billy Joel said? He's like, it's the unfinished music, whatever. Definitely not my favorite album. People love it. For the time, it was interesting to be because it wasn't so polished and it was just fun. I can imagine it being, this is interesting. But... let's be real, you can't keep doing that. It's a one-time thing. Anyway, yeah, that's another thing. Is they're all, at this point, unenthused. And there's nothing stopping John from ever saying, hey, Paul, want to go to the studio? Why is it always got to be Paul calling them, And I guarantee you, Paul wouldn't be upset. Oh, you have songs already? He'd probably be like, oh, let me see them. And help work on them with him. And probably, knowing Paul, would have already written some music himself. Let's do it. All right, I've been working on some songs. And him in bachelor life, whatever. But when he got married to Linda, he still couldn't put his guitar down. He's chilling with his sheep and he's playing his guitar. I don't know why, because John's married, he keeps saying, I'm sitting around eating food with my wife. Okay, that's great. What is that going to do with anything? And another thing, and I know maybe Paul set the direction of the album, right? Because he had his whole idea of, we have alter here. So maybe it's harder for John to bring in his own ideas, maybe. I guess, because it's okay, you're going this direction, now I have to do that. But also, why can't they just finish Paul's songs and then help work? They all work on songs together. And they all, John always has his section of songs. So even if Paul already has songs, they do that, and then they work on John's songs. I don't understand why Paul can't have some already ready. Hey, look at what I've got. The other thing is, we all, Paul can't quit making music. We know this. He can't help it no matter what he's doing. He's on vacation, he's on a break, he's at home. He carries his guitar with him everywhere he goes. There's a photo of him back in the day before he even met John where he's hanging out with his family and his aunts and his cousins and he's got his guitar at the beach or whatever, the open field. He carried that thing there, There's pictures of Paul and John outside of John's house and John's sitting there reading his little magazine or something while Paul's sitting next to him with his guitar. The guy can't let go of his guitar. He goes and he visits John's house after he got married to Yoko with his guitar on his back. He goes with it everywhere he goes. It's just he's obsessed with it. He can't quit making John, which is cool. I'm like that too, where I get more like John, where I, creative wise, I get really into something for a while. I'm okay, drawing and stuff, I'm all into it. And then I have these periods of, okay, I'm burnt out. That's cool, that's fine. But I feel like Paul normally is constantly going. That's just how he is. He can't help it. So, and then if he calls him up early, before he makes any music, they're all taking their breaks, right? Can you imagine, as soon as they take their break, Paul's like, hey, if you want to work on some music? John would probably be like, I'm taking a break. No, Jim, Paul. So Paul's probably waiting. Okay, let me give them their break. Cool. Okay, I think it's been long enough. Let me call him. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I just feel obviously John's always pouting. He's always saying something crazy, so whatever. And then anyway, so the other thing I think's funny is that we were watching something and reading up on it, and Paul takes John's instrument, starts playing his instrument, and I'm that's weird. And John didn't mind. And I'm who says? Why didn't John mind? So I'm thinking maybe this is one of those moments where, okay, wow, Paul's controlling. I'm looking for it. Wait a minute. What was I saying? Where did I leave off? Can you be? Yeah. No, I'm not ready. Pause it. And delete. Pause and delete. So anyways, there's this, so upset I got that interruption.
Just wait then. Watch after.
Oh my gosh, why can't John play his instrument? Why can't John contribute something? Why is Paul taking it from him? And then we look it up and we're why didn't John care? And it said he wasn't really into it. He wasn't that enthused. And that inspired or something. I don't remember. But basically, he's on drugs. And he's on LSD, and he was more than happy to let Paul take the workload. That's what happened. We looked into it. Like, okay. And I guarantee you, Paul would have been more than happy to have John walk in sober and ready to go and excited to, play his part. But most likely he's coming in there tired, exhausted, spaced out, and Paul's like, I guess I gotta play your part for you. Whatever. I'm not saying that, I don't know, maybe John could have done it, but I'm just saying it's just funny to me. It's like, really? Paul has to take over controlling the scene. Oops. But really, I have to play your guitar because you're drunk, I mean, you're high and stuff, on drugs. And also, George was, on drugs during this time, too. That's something to think about. And, Ringo went through, an alcoholic addiction at some point. And then there's that one time that everyone loves to reference where Paul telling Ringo how to play his drums or whatever. And Ringo got upset and left the band. Which happened, by the way. But I'm pretty sure that this was around the same time. He was having, alcohol problems and wasn't really putting in his best work. And Paul was not the only one telling him how to play his drums, apparently. I guess other people were. And that was, the last straw was Paul. So he gets the blame for that one. Even though, that wasn't it. But basically, Ringo felt more disappointed, I think, with himself than anything, if I remember correctly. It's I didn't feel like I was a good drummer. And then they all apologized to him. Come back, Ringo, we love you. So, whatever. Anything else needs to be said? Okay, yeah, let's keep going. Paul kept everybody together, okay? Nobody was enthused pretty much after 1967. George, I think the fame got too crazy. The whole Jesus comment. I don't think he got over it after that. John got on drugs. They all went through it, for sure. But they made as much music as they made because of Paul brought them to the studio. Whatever. Everyone's like, I love the Beatles music. I wish we had more. You wouldn't have had as much as you had without Paul. Even Ringo says so. Ringo's like, we were all sitting around in the garden, chilling and being lazy. We didn't want to work. And Paul would call us up. Every time the phone rang, we knew it was Paul telling us to go to the studio. And he says, we would have not made as much music without Paul. So maybe he's controlling, but he's controlling the Beatles to make music and fame. I gotta